Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you the story of Ethan Winslow, a New Orleans businessman who had a near-death experience and came back with shocking revelations about what hell really is. This journey of self-discovery and lessons in love and forgiveness will challenge everything you believe about life and the afterlife. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any content. Get ready for this intense and transformative story. Let's go. My name is Ethan Winslow, and I'm living proof that life can change in the blink of an eye. For many years, I led a life that many would consider successful. He was a businessman in the technology sector in New Orleans, a vibrant city full of history, where the past and present intertwine on every corner. Besides putting in endless hours at work, my greatest pride has always been being a father to two teenagers who have challenged and inspired me in ways I never imagined. My passion for motorcycles was something that gave me a unique feeling of freedom. The sharp breeze from the road, the roar of the engine, and the adrenaline that coursed through my veins were my favorite escape from the pressure and responsibilities of everyday life. At 45, I felt like I had found a balance between my career, my role as a father, and my small pleasures. But that sense of control was just an illusion that shattered one sunny, sweltering summer afternoon. "Dad, don't forget that you promised to be back early for dinner today," shouted my youngest son, Tyler, as I adjusted my helmet before getting on my shiny Harley. I gave a calm smile and gave a thumbs up. "I won't forget, Ty. It's a promise." It was a promise I sincerely intended to keep. But life has a peculiar way of testing our certainty and upending our expectations in brutal ways. The city was in full ferment. The streets vibrated with the heat and chaotic movement of a New Orleans that never slept. The road was congested, which forced me to make an impulsive decision: keep to the shoulder to avoid traffic. As the familiar landscape of historic buildings and gnarled trees flashed past the corners of my vision, little did I know that I was about to face something that would completely redefine my existence. In an instant, the metallic gleam of a truck making a left turn appeared in front of me. The shock was violent, a force that threw me into a vacuum of pain and darkness. It all happened in a whirlwind so fast that I only remember feeling the crushing impact and the sharp pain in my leg before everything went out. The impact was indescribable. In an instant, everything became a mixture of lights, sounds, and a pain that consumed every fiber of my being. I remember hearing the metallic sound of my Harley being ripped apart and someone's high-pitched scream. Perhaps it was my own, or an echo in my mind that refused to accept reality. The blue sky became an indistinct blur of blurred colors as I spun through the air, until I finally collided with the hot asphalt. The shock of contact with the ground was a sharp blow that left me breathless, as if the life had been ripped from me. My eyelids weighed tons, but I was able to open my eyes for a brief moment and see the scene around me. Red and blue lights from the vehicles flashed frantically, forming bright halos that blinded me. The sound of sirens and the voices of rescuers echoed in my ears. Far away, as if I were submerged, I could feel a searing pain in my right leg, a pain that seemed to vibrate through the rest of my body and pull me back into consciousness, only to drown me again in the darkness. "We have to stabilize him now. Be careful with your leg. It appears to be fractured in multiple places." A paramedic's urgent voice cut through the haze of pain, and then I felt their steady hands lift me up. A feeling of strange lightness came over me, as if part of me was no longer attached to that broken body. I watched as they placed me on the stretcher, and in a moment of confused lucidity, I realized I was being transported to the helicopter. As the noise of the propellers roared, something curious happened. My field of vision expanded in an impossible way. I could see my body limp, the paramedics working quickly, and at the same time I felt an unusual peace. The pain disappeared completely, and the reality around me began to dissolve into a welcoming clarity, as if I was being pulled by an invisible current. The last thing I saw before everything changed was the apprehensive look from one of the paramedics who muttered, "Don't leave us now, man." Suddenly, the entire scene disappeared, and absolute silence took over me. I was floating in a formless, timeless space where gravity and pain no longer existed. It was then that I realized something extraordinary was happening. I was no longer just on the edge of life, I was beyond it. As I floated in that serene void, I realized that I was no longer attached to the flesh and bones that had suffered so brutally. The feeling was indescribable, a state of absolute freedom, as if all the bonds of the physical world had been severed at once. The pain and terror that minutes before enveloped me were now just distant memories, shadows of a state of being that no longer defined me. The space I was in was shapeless, but it radiated a soft, golden, comforting light that seemed to whisper promises of peace. "Ethan," a familiar voice called my name, pulling me from the silence inside. I looked around, trying to locate the source of that voice that seemed to resonate inside me. It was then that the mist slowly parted, revealing a figure that made my heart, or whatever was in me at that moment, jump. Elijah Hawthorne, my stepfather who died almost 20 years ago, was there, as if time had never touched him. His face wore the same welcoming smile as when he taught me how to ride a bike when I was a child. "Elijah, is that you?" I asked, my voice echoing in a way that seemed to vibrate within that space. He nodded, eyes radiating infinite understanding. "Yes, Ethan, and the time has come for you to understand." He reached out his hand, but it wasn't a physical touch that I felt. It was as if his presence connected directly to my soul, conveying a sense of security that I hadn't felt since childhood. The environment around us began to change, as if shaped by our memories and thoughts. The golden light gave way to a series of scenes that gently appeared and disappeared around us, like moving paintings. "This is the place between here and there," Elijah continued, his voice filled with a wisdom that surpassed words. "Here, there is no time or pain as you know it. It's where you can see what you need to see, feel what you need to feel." The scenery that formed around me seemed to pulse with meanings that I still couldn't decipher. Each image brought back memories. The birth of my children, my mother's warm hugs, the moments of glory and failure. It was a review of my life, but unlike any other memory I had ever had, it wasn't a simple recapitulation. I was there, living again and feeling the thoughts and emotions of the people who interacted with me. I saw my youngest son Tyler's face when I lost my temper because he hadn't done his homework. I felt his frustration and desire to please me. I relived the laughter shared on pizza and movie nights, feeling a wave of love that made me want to cry, even without a body. Elias watched me with an understanding look, as if he knew that each memory was opening doors inside me. "You're here to learn, Ethan," he said, and the words reverberated with a weight that only in that moment could I understand. It was an invitation to dive deep into who I was and, more importantly, what it meant to be alive. As I remained in that ethereal space, absorbing the avalanche of memories that surrounded me, Elias walked beside me with an almost supernatural calm. His presence radiated such a serene and comforting energy that it seemed to dissolve any trace of anxiety in me. He looked at me with eyes filled with an understanding that required no words, but he spoke nonetheless, as if he knew I needed to hear. "You always looked for answers, Ethan. I've always wanted to understand the why behind everything," Elias said, his voice sounding like a gentle echo. "And now, you are closer to those answers than you have ever been." I looked at him, confused, as the mood around us changed once again. The golden light became a familiar, verdant field. It was the same park where, years ago, I used to play with my children. He could feel the heat of the sun, the smell of fresh grass, and even the whisper of the wind. But something was different. It was as if everything was imbued with an inner glow, a vibration that pulsed with life. "Elias, is this all real?" The question came out without me noticing, and he just smiled. "What is real, Ethan? What you feel now is more real than what you thought you knew. We are in the space between experiences, where the truth reveals itself in pure form." Before I could question further, a wave of memories came flooding back. I relived my mother's death, the suffocating pain I felt when I lost her, and how Elijah came into my life soon after. I remembered what a pillar of strength he was, someone who brought stability amid the chaos. The sight moved me so much that I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my heart, or whatever I had at that moment. "And why are you here with me now?" I asked, already anticipating the answer, but eager to hear it. Elias walked over and placed his hand on my shoulder, a familiar and comforting gesture. "Because your journey is not over, Ethan. There are truths you need to understand, not just for yourself, but for those who depend on you." As he spoke, the scenes around us changed again, now to moments of loss and regret. I saw friends I lost to time and decisions I made that hurt others. I felt your pain, your sadness, and it was as if the scars that I carried in silence were opened, but not to hurt me. It was to teach me. Elias looked at me in a way that said, "It's okay. This is part of your learning. Ethan, every mistake, every pain, is an opportunity for growth. You need to see that the hell you fear is actually a state we create when we fail to forgive ourselves or others." The words hung in the air, resonating within me with an undeniable truth. There, in that moment between worlds, I began to understand that my journey was not just a search for answers, but for redemption, understanding, and, above all, love. The landscape around us continued to change, shaped by memories that seemed to come to life with a clarity I had never experienced. It was like watching a movie, but with one crucial difference. I was there, inside each scene, feeling everything with an overwhelming intensity. Elias accompanied me in silence, letting me absorb the revelations of each moment. The first memory that came to mind was a fight with my oldest son, Caleb. We had discussed his life choices and how I felt he was wasting his potential. I remember the hurt look on his face, but I never fully understood the impact of that moment until now. It was as if a wave of sadness hit me, coming not from me, but from Caleb. I felt his disappointment, his sense of helplessness, and his desperate desire for my support. The pain was so real that it felt like I was experiencing its frustration. "Do you see it now, Ethan?" Elijah's voice brought me back for a moment. "Every word has weight, every action leaves marks, but you can still learn from it." The next scene was one of the happiest in my life. A night when Tyler and I had watched a silly comedy movie, eating popcorn and laughing late into the night. The memory brought me a familiar warmth, but this time, I also felt the sense of comfort and security that Tyler experienced. It was as if, at that moment, he was sure that, despite any conflict, I would always be by his side. The empathy I felt when reliving these moments was so profound that I began to realize that my interactions, good or bad, had an impact that went beyond what I imagined. "Elias, this is overwhelming," I confessed, my voice shaking. He nodded, with a look of understanding. "And yes, but that's how you learn. And learning is what allows you to grow." The vision morphed again, and this time I was in an office arguing with a coworker. He had a hardened look in his eyes, and I relived the pressure I felt back then to land an important contract. But what I felt now was my colleague's anxiety and fear of failure, emotions I had never noticed at the time. Each scene revealed a piece of truth that I had ignored, showing that the world around me was much more complex and interconnected than I realized. Every time a memory unfolded, whether of success or failure, I felt something inside me loosen. It was as if the accumulated hurts and regrets were being exposed to the light for the first time, and that light was slowly dissolving them. The life review was not just an emotional experience. It was a journey of healing, of understanding that the real prison we often live in is made up of unresolved regrets and resentments. "Everything you've experienced has a purpose, Ethan," Elijah said, his voice now barely above a whisper. "You need to see this in order to move forward, whether in this life or beyond." I looked at him, and this time I felt a different peace, as if the pieces of a puzzle were beginning to fit together in my mind. The weight of what it meant to be alive became lighter, as if I finally began to understand that love and empathy weren't just concepts. They were the foundation of everything. As my life review began to subside, I felt as if I had plunged deeply into an ocean of emotions, but emerged with renewed understanding. The silence around us was filled, not with emptiness, but with a heavy peace, as if existence itself had paused for me to absorb everything I had learned. Elias remained at my side, and for a moment, his gaze became more serious, carrying a message he knew I was ready to hear. "Now you must see the truth you feared so much, Ethan," he said, and the scene around us changed once again. I was transported to a space that felt dark and suffocating, but wasn't physical. There was no fire, demons, or the terrifying images I had associated with hell in my mind my entire life. Instead, it was a space filled with faces known and unknown, all trapped in silent suffering, their eyes reflecting a despair that seemed to have no end. "Is this hell?" I asked, my voice cracking. Elias nodded, but in a way that made me understand that the answer was more complex. "This is the hell people create for themselves, Ethan. It's not a place you're sent to. It's a state you carry." I looked around and saw that some of the faces stood out. I recognized friends who were gone, some who had led lives marked by regret and guilt. They were not being tortured by something external. What imprisoned them was the weight of sorrows, unspoken words, and unforgiven actions. One woman in particular caught my attention. She was the mother of a childhood friend, who always seemed filled with sadness. Now, I saw her hardened expression and silent tears that ran down her face, as if she were trapped in a constant reminder of something she couldn't change. They are stuck here until they can find forgiveness, Elias explained. Not a forgiveness that comes from others, but from themselves. And you also carry parts of that burden without even knowing it. His words pierced my heart, and memories of old guilt that I thought had been buried came flooding back to the surface. Fights with Caleb, hurts that we never resolved, moments of frustration when I stopped reaching out. The idea that I could become one of those lost faces, trapped in a prison of my own resentments, terrified me. So, what do I do to not end up like this? I asked. The urgency in my voice was evident. Elijah smiled softly. You're already doing it, Ethan. You are learning. The key is love, forgiveness, and acceptance that making mistakes is part of the journey. The dark scenery around us began to dissipate, and a new golden light took over, illuminating the previously sad faces. Some began to look up, and a sense of hope passed through the room. It was as if this new understanding had the power to change everything, not just in me, but in the souls around me. Remember, Ethan, Elias said as the atmosphere returned to the serene countryside from before. Hell is not eternal. It is a choice that can be unmade when you are willing to learn, forgive, and grow. This truth hit me with the force of silent thunder. For the first time, I realized that the shadows we carry can be dispelled, and that everyone, including me, has the chance to transform their pain into learning and, ultimately, into freedom. After the revelation about hell and emotional suffering, the environment around us began to change once again. The golden light gently gave way to a space that I didn't immediately recognize, but which emanated a vibrant, bustling energy. Suddenly I realized I was in a peculiar restaurant. The tables were made of rustic wood and the lighting was soft, as if invisible candles were spread throughout the room. There were young people everywhere, talking in small groups and laughing like there was no tomorrow. The atmosphere was welcoming, but there was something unsettling. None of them seemed to realize I was there. I looked at Elias, waiting for some explanation, but he walked away with a nod and disappeared into the shadows. Before I could call him back, a figure appeared from behind the counter. He was a man with a calm, wise expression, wearing an apron, but there was something about him that made me freeze in place. It was me, but an older, more serene version. The eyes of this alternative me seemed to see beyond what was visible. "Welcome, Ethan," the figure said, in a voice that sounded deep and familiar. "This is where learning meets purpose." "What is that?" I asked, my heart, or what was left of it, beating fast. He smiled, an almost paternal gesture. "Here, you see souls who have not yet experienced life. They are preparing for their first incarnations, and you are here to guide them." I looked around at the young people, noticing that there was something different about them. They laughed and talked, but there was an untouched innocence on their faces. They were, as the older version of me said, souls who had not yet experienced the physical world. My mission became clear in an instant. I was to guide them, prepare them for what was to come. But how? I approached a group that was animatedly discussing something I couldn't understand. "Hey, can I talk to you guys for a moment?" I asked, trying to sound friendly, but no one turned to look at me. It seemed like my voice was no more than a whisper amidst the hubbub. Frustration and doubt began to overwhelm me. Why was I there, in a place where no one could hear or see me? The older version of me, the owner, walked up to me, eyes beaming with understanding. "That's part of the test, Ethan. You need to find a way to reach these souls. But to do that, you must first understand something essential. Yourself." His words echoed inside me, and it was as if the ground disappeared for a moment. I realized that, in life, I tried to teach so many times without really listening, without connecting deeply. The test was more than talking to these souls, was to find the way to impart wisdom through true understanding. I took a deep breath, or as close to it as I could, and looked at the young men with new awareness. I put aside the urgency to be heard and began to observe. Every smile, every laugh, and every expression brought stories that had not yet been told. The real challenge was not speaking, but listening, feeling, and understanding. The owner, my higher self, smiled as if he knew I was on the right path. "Now you start to see, Ethan. Now you start to learn," he said, and the light around him seemed to shine a little brighter. As soon as the light in the restaurant began to dissipate, the environment around me changed again. Now I was in an open field, bathed in soft, golden light. There was an air of peace so profound that for a moment, all the emotional weight of previous experiences dissolved. It was like I was home, but not a physical home. It was a home for my soul. As I walked through the field, I saw figures appearing in the distance. They approached slowly, and as their faces became clearer, I felt a tightness in my chest. I recognized childhood friends, schoolmates who had left too soon, people who had been part of my life in ways small and large. The emotion hit me hard, and a wave of joy and longing washed over me. "Ethan," a voice called my name, and when I turned, I saw Sam, my best friend from childhood. He died in a car accident when we were still teenagers. His features were young and full of life, as if time had never passed. He smiled at me and wrapped me in a hug that felt real as any I'd ever received in life. "Sam, it's so good to see you." The words came out in a whisper, and he patted my back, like he did in our childhood games. "Believe me, it's good to see you too, Ethan. We are all here for a reason." I looked around and saw other friends who, in one way or another, were part of my life. Each one carried a look of understanding and welcome. Their presence gave me a sense of peace I didn't know I needed. For a moment, everything seemed complete, as if this were the final reward. But why are you here? Why am I here? The question seemed to have hung in the air before I voiced it. It was then that I noticed a group further away, figures I didn't immediately recognize, but whose faces still seemed familiar. The mystery dissipated when I saw Elijah's gaze appear again, but this time he was not alone. He was accompanied by my mother, who I lost when I was still young. She had the same serene, loving appearance I remembered. He came close to me and touched my face, like he did when I was a child, and everything inside me seemed to break and come back together at the same time. "You were always strong, Ethan, and now you need to remember why you are here." Before I could respond, I heard another voice. This time it wasn't from the light field, but from distant reality. "Dad, come home, please." It was Tyler, my youngest son. His voice pulled me in with an irresistible force, like a magnet. I looked at my mother and she smiled, indicating that it was time to leave. "Go, Ethan. You still have a lot to do," she whispered. And in the blink of an eye, the scene around me disappeared, giving way to the darkness between the worlds. And then, the hospital room. I woke up in the hospital with a choked sigh, as if I had emerged from a deep dive. The room's fluorescent lights were cold and unforgiving, contrasting brutally with the warmth of the golden light that still seemed to glow in my memory. The constant sound of heart monitors and the hum of medical devices filled the air, bringing me back to the physical world. Beside me, holding my hand tightly, was my mother, her eyes filled with tears and a smile of relief that said it all. "You're back, Ethan. You're really back," she said in a choked voice, and I felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost made me lose my breath again. It was as if every cell in my body was aware of what had just happened, but also a silent understanding that this was just the beginning of something bigger. I spent weeks in the hospital, doctors monitoring my physical and emotional recovery. My legs were seriously injured, with multiple fractures that would leave me in rehabilitation for months. However, the physical pain was insignificant compared to the profound change I felt within me. I was no longer the same man who had left the house that sunny summer afternoon. The transition between what I experienced in the place between here and there and everyday life was challenging. There were times when I closed my eyes, I could feel Elijah's presence, like a whisper in my mind that reminded me of the lessons I had learned. But reality dealt me a blow that tested every part of my transformed being. The loss of Caleb, my oldest son, to drug addiction. The news was like a blade piercing my chest. Caleb had struggled with addiction for years, a burden we carried as a family, trying to help him find his way back. However, the overdose that took his life happened at a time when I thought he was finally getting better. The pain of loss was overwhelming, and for a while I felt like I was returning to the emotional hell that Elijah had shown me. But something changed in me. Between the tears and the pain, I started to notice little signs that looked like messages. A rose fallen in a park, the sound of a song Caleb liked playing out of nowhere, a sudden breeze that made him feel like he was nearby. These moments were not mere coincidences. They were reminders of what I had learned, that life and death were parts of the same cycle, linked by a love that transcended all barriers. The day of trial has arrived for the young drug dealer who sold the fatal drug to Caleb. I sat in the courtroom, anger boiling under my skin. But when the boy walked in, something changed. He was so young, his eyes filled with fear and regret. I remembered the souls I saw in the spiritual restaurant, the faces marked by self-imposed suffering. It was as if Elijah's voice echoed through me. Forgiveness is the key, Ethan. In that moment, anger gave way to something unexpected. Compassion. I saw in that young man the same fragility that exists in all of us, and a strange peace came over me. The pain of loss was still there, but now I knew that the way to move forward involved not only accepting, but also forgiving. After the trial, I felt like a part of me had finally found peace. The forgiveness I offered to the young drug dealer was one of the most difficult decisions of my life, but also one of the most transformative. It was not just a gesture of compassion for him, but an act of liberation for myself. I understood that forgiveness does not mean forgetting or justifying, but rather recognizing the humanity that lives in all of us, and the choice not to carry the darkness within oneself. The following weeks were marked by a sense of clarity I had never experienced before. In each moment of pain or memory of Caleb, I found new strength to seek meaning. The lessons I learned from my near-death experience resonated with me every day. The hell I once feared was, in fact, real, but not as a place of eternal fire, but rather as an internal state of bitterness and resentment. With this realization, I began to live more consciously, recognizing that small day-to-day interactions were much more important than I imagined. One afternoon, as I was sitting in my garden, surrounded by the sound of birds and the scent of flowers, I felt a gentle breeze pass by. It was as if the air itself carried a message, a memory of Elijah's warm embrace and Caleb's confident smile. These small synchronicities have become a constant reminder that life is a continuous cycle, where every experience and soul is intertwined by an invisible web of love and learning. I began sharing my story with others who were also facing challenges and losses. It was during one of these conversations that I met Sarah, a mother who had lost her daughter to cancer. We talked for hours, and I saw in his eyes the same search for meaning that I knew so well. As I told her about my near-death experience and the truths I learned, I saw her light up, as if new hope had been kindled in the darkness of her pain. The connection we created in that moment was one of the greatest gifts I have received since the accident. Over time, my mission became clear: to share what I learned and to live in a way that reflected the truths that Elias and the owner had shown me. The true meaning of life was in accepting the interconnectedness between all beings, in the ability to love even in the face of pain, and in the constant choice to forgive, not just others, but myself. On the one-year anniversary of Caleb's departure, I organized a get-together at the park where we used to play. Friends, family, and people who had heard my story gathered. As I spoke about love, forgiveness, and the eternal continuity of life, I felt as if a soft light enveloped me, like the same golden light of the place between here and there. I ended my speech with the words that now guide my life. True peace is not in avoiding pain, but in finding love and understanding even in the midst of it. And hell, my friends, is not a distant place, but a choice that we all have the power to transform. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.